Federal immigration officers fatally shot a man Saturday in Minneapolis. He was an ICU nurse who worked at a local Veteran Affairs hospital, another controversial killing by U.S. immigration agents, and the second U.S. citizen killed this month. CNN analyzed cell phone footage from multiple angles. Taken together, they appear at odds with the Department of Homeland Security's initial claims about the lead-up to officers firing on Alex Preddy. Around 9 a.m. Central, video captures two people approaching a federal immigration officer in front of an unidentified vehicle. The sound of whistles is blaring in the background. Alex Preddy enters the frame here. He's filming an officer interacting with protesters and waving a car through. 15 seconds later, Preddy yells, "Do not push them into the traffic!" In their statement, DHS said that an individual approached officers with, quote, a 9mm semi-automatic handgun. This video seems to show officers approaching Preddy instead of the other way around. We'll see later that Preddy does appear to have had a gun in his waistband, but this video shows he didn't have a gun in his hand, only a phone. Video from this white car shows an up-close angle of a federal immigration officer pushing one protester. Then, 3 seconds later, he pushes Preddy. And then, as the camera comes into focus, you see the same federal officer push a third protester with the orange backpack. Preddy raises his hand and turns away, just as the officer sprays him with a chemical irritant. You see Preddy and the other protester trying to help the person with the orange backpack. You can see here an officer pulling Preddy off of this person. 3 more officers join, and then 2 more. Preddy is on the ground under them. One officer in a tan beanie can be seen repeatedly striking Preddy's head with a metal can. You can see an officer in a gray jacket walk into the frame. There isn't a gun in his hand. Seconds later, officers shout. The officer removes the gun from Preddy's belt. The officer steps away from the scene carrying a firearm, seen here in his right hand. Then, gunfire. At least 10 shots ring out. We looked back at the scene from different angles and slowed down the footage. This officer, wearing a black beanie, can be seen drawing his firearm and pointing it in Preddy's direction. We can't see his gun when the first shot is fired, but we can see that this officer fired the second shot. In this angle, you see a second officer also had his gun drawn, and here, he's pointing his weapon at Preddy as we hear gunshots, though it isn't clear if he's the one firing.
What the f***? Did they f***ing kill that guy?
Preddy collapses onto the ground as the officers scatter backwards from around him. The same agent in the black beanie from earlier can be seen firing 5 final shots as Preddy lies there, motionless. Nobody approached his body for 24 seconds. When officers do return to Preddy, they appear to begin searching his body. Video shows that about a minute after Preddy collapsed, immigration officers ask for medical support. When CNN asked DHS about the officer removing the gun before the shooting, DHS repeated their earlier statement, quote, "Officers attempted to disarm the suspect, but the armed suspect violently resisted."
Let's go around. No, you're just right inside. Let's go around.
It looked to us from every angle, sir, that he was approached by them when he was helping another individual who was pushed down. What evidence do you have that he was assaulting any law enforcement?
Dana, we don't need a suspect's help in an active law enforcement scene.
When you say suspect, what is he suspected of?
That's an active law enforcement scene. He knew that was an active law enforcement scene, especially when the officers approached him, and it's very evident he did not need to be where he was.
When somebody is pushed down and a person's instinct is to help that person, when somebody's pushed down by law enforcement, you're saying that you just stand back and let law enforcement do what they're doing?
You know, Dana, every situation is different. What our officers are faced with here in Minneapolis are chaotic, very difficult and violent situations in which individuals, and this suspect is not the only one to bring a loaded weapon to a riot. The situations are chaotic and ever-changing. Follow directions for law enforcement. Don't inject yourself knowingly beforehand into a law enforcement situation.
With respect, it feels as though in some ways you're blaming the victim here.
The victims are the Border Patrol agents. I'm not blaming the Border Patrol agents. The victim are the Border Patrol agents. The suspect put himself in that situation. The victims are the Border Patrol agents there.
I just want to also go back to what I was asking about with regard to what Secretary Noem said, that he was brandishing a gun. At any point, do you have any evidence that, yes, he had a gun on his person? Was he brandishing it?
We heard the law enforcement officer say gun, gun, gun. So at some point, they knew there was a gun. So again, that is going to be part of that investigation as to what was happening on the ground there between those victims, the Border Patrol agent victims, and the suspect.
大家好，我是主播周玉琴。很多的朋友告诉我们，选择原版的太阳星全效克菲尔益生菌，它添加有羽衣甘蓝，健康再加分。而有睡眠困扰的朋友们，赶快选择蓝色包装这一款晚安加强版，绝对是更有感。每日克菲尔，时刻美好 ，Good Feel。Feel good， 请上快点购为健康下单，而且要记得输入推荐代码，有额外的折扣优惠。太阳星全效克菲尔益生菌基础版、晚安加强版，新包装改版，内容不变，抽取更方便。要吃就吃最好的。